So what do we know about the Neolithic and the people of Britain during the Neolithic? And more importantly, what did these people actually believe? The Neolithic period begins in Britain around 4000 BCE. When agriculture, monument building and pottery arrive with people of Anatolian descent. And for those of you that don't know, Anatolia is that region that is now called Turkey. And people of Anatolia who migrated through Europe, they fused with or displaced Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. By 3000 BC, Britain was a landscape of farmers, building ceremonial monuments and communal tombs across the islands. So that's our introduction. So I want to know what life was like. Just everyday life for the Neolithic Britons. And from our research notes, I have most lived in small kin-based groups or extended households, often near fertile river valleys or coastlines. Houses like those at Skara Brae, and we'll get to Skara Brae later, show standardized designs suggesting egalitarian social norms. Daily life revolved around tending crops and animals, crafting tools and pottery, gathering wild resources, and maintaining ritual practices. But daily survival and spirituality weren't separate. Life was spiritualized with ritual embedded in domestic activity, and we see evidence of this up in Skara Brae. So that gives us a pretty good picture of what life was like in Neolithic Britain and what went on in these Neolithic villages. But more importantly to me, I want to know what they believed in. I mean, did they have a priesthood? Was this a priesthood that united communities? Did they all believe in the same things? Or were there differences amongst the tribes? So, let's go back to our research notes here. Britain was likely divided into regional tribe-like groups, sharing language, ancestry, and land. These groups had local traditions, but also participated in wider networks. And this is evident even from similar monument types built across Britain, such as the long barrows and the stone circles. And they had shared pottery styles. So there's evidence of a shared culture here. And then we talk about Stonehenge's imported bluestones from Wales, which means there was connection and communication between the people. And the mass gatherings at these ritual centres, such as Darrington Walls, Stonehenge, and Skara Brae, or should I say, the Nessa Brodka. So that shows that there was clearly connections between the tribal groups. So what about the priesthood then? And there's no evidence of a formal priestly caste, like in later Iron. We try that again. There's no evidence of a formal priestly caste. One more time. There's no evidence of a formal priestly caste like in later Iron Age societies. I'm not doing it again. And of course, those later Iron Age societies, we're talking about the Druids. So there's no evidence of a formal priestly caste. But there likely were rituals. I don't know what's going on at the moment. I can't get my tongue around anything. But there likely were ritual specialists, shamans or community elders who led ceremonies or managed spiritual affairs. Now we come to the Nessa Brodka. At the Nessa Brodka, certain buildings may have functioned as ritual chambers, and those allowed to enter them could have held spiritual authority. Their authority was likely localized and ritual-based, not hierarchical or bureaucratic like later religions. And that's interesting as an aside of what separates beliefs from formal religions. So then, was there a shared religion? Did they believe in exactly the same things right throughout the country? Well, evidence suggests, looking at the monuments that they built right throughout the country, that these monuments were all aligned with the sun in some form or another, either with the winter or the summer solstice. And then we have, what else did we have? Similar burial customs. So they buried the dead in exactly the same kind of way. And they also had shared symbols. And all of these suggest a pan-British spiritual framework, even if there were some changes or adaptations within local communities. And one way to think of it, and I quite like the way that this is put, think of it like this: not one organised religion, but a shared cosmology with regionally distinct expressions, much like how Indigenous American tribes could share a belief in the Great Spirit, but differ in myth, ritual, and sacred rites. So, although we can see there's evidence of a pan-British spiritual framework, a national, although the concept of nationality didn't exist at this time, they all believed in very similar concepts. So, what I wanted to know was just what those concepts were. What did they actually believe in? And we've got, although we lack text, material evidence strongly suggests their worldview was animistic. Now, for those of you that don't know what animism is, we've done some videos, be links, blah de blah, and down there. So, in a nutshell, animism is the belief that all things contain a spirit. So, like I say, if you want more information, you'll find links in the description down below. And so they were animistic, and they venerated this, not just strong evidence, but we know that they venerated the ancestors. And we see this right throughout all these monuments that they built were in veneration, or in at least in some part, were built to venerate the ancestors. And their orientation towards the natural cycles of the earth, or should I say, the sun and the moon, seem to play very significant roles. So that core beliefs likely included, as we've already discussed, the cycles of nature. Solar and lunar movements were central. Stonehenge, Maeshowe, and many others are aligned with the solstices, and some with the equinoxes. So these events marked seasonal transitions and likely were celebrated with feasts, ceremonies that revolved around the act of renewal. And as we also said, they venerated the ancestors, the belief that when you died, you went to the underworld and the world of the ancestors, and you would always be there to help and guide those who are still left behind in the world of the living. And this is evidenced by the construction of the long barrows and the passage graves, some of them used for generations, and this suggests a deep connection with the ancestors. The dead were not gone, but active spiritual presences in daily life. Also, the way in which they conducted the burials is quite revealing in regards to their ancestor worship. They didn't just take the dead bodies and put them into the monuments and the passage graves, but the evidence suggests that bones were often removed, and it's suspected that this removal of bones was so that the ancestors, or at least parts of them, could be active within their rituals. But there's also something else interesting about this removal of the bones, and I saw just recently an interview with a certain indigenous person. I think he was from South America, and he was asked about, well, they still have this veneration of the ancestors, and he was asked about the removal of the bones. And his view is that, well, when you die, they broke things up, so they separated the body so that it could be more easily integrated into the world of the ancestors. So the world of the ancestors wasn't just one ancestor, it was all the ancestors together. And so they mixed these bones up in order to free the spirit that was inside, so that the spirit could more easily integrate into this world of the ancestors. And this belief seemed to carry on right down through into the Iron Age, on the same with the Iron Age Celts would cast perfectly good items into the rivers and into the lakes. But before they did, they always broke them up. And so, continuing the theme, the idea of breaking up these sacrificial offerings, the idea was so that they could be more easily accepted by the gods of the rivers, the gods of the lakes. But there's something else about their beliefs. These monuments that they build to venerate the ancestors and were aligned with the solar cycle, they weren't just singular monuments. There seems to be evidence, if we look towards Stonehenge and the Ness of Brodka, we see an evidence of a ritual landscape, not just a singular monument. And so, coming back to my research notes here, ritual sites were not isolated, but part of a symbolic landscape. Movements between life and death were ritualized through plays, wood for the living such as we see at Darrington Walls and Woodhenge, Stone for the Dead. Of course, we see at Stonehenge. And should I expand on this here? Recent findings, or let's say that most scholars now understand the purpose of Stonehenge. There are two main monuments there, as I've just mentioned, Woodhenge and Stonehenge. Woodhenge was the land of the living, and Stonehenge the land of the dead. And it's believed that the festivities, celebrations started at Woodhenge, where there was ritualistic hunting, definitely signs of feasting. So they would start their feasting and their celebrations at Woodhenge, and then they would walk aside the River Avon. So the River Avon played a part in this as well. And they would come up to where an avenue was built, a straight avenue that walked directly into the stone monument that we now know as Stonehenge, the land of the dead. And so the point is that this wasn't just one particular monument. It was a whole set of monuments that represented something. The journey that the ancestors took when they passed on. And the whole point of these festivities was to venerate, honour and commune with the ancestors. And so they followed a journey from the world of living to the world of the dead. And when did they do it? At the most optimal time, when the sun had finished its cycle, and it too was passing into death, into what they saw as the underworld, the world of the ancestors. And so their arrival at the world of the ancestors, the world of the dead, coincided with the death of the great sun god as it entered the underworld. And so this whole symbolism was very potent, very powerful. So let's come back to where we left off with our notes here and just reiterate a couple of things. Ritual sites were not isolated, but part of a symbolic landscape. Movements between life and death were ritualized through place. Wood for the living, stone for the dead. Sites were often located on liminal boundaries, rivers, cliffs, or horizons, reinforcing the transition between worlds. And as I said, we see that at Stonehenge again with the River Avon, which was a boundary towards their or which marked the route of their procession. They followed the banks of the Avon up to the monument at Stonehenge. So what else do we know about their beliefs? And there's some evidence that suggests that the animals that provided sustenance for themselves, were also venerated. And we get this from the discovery that animal bones, especially cattle, were often ceremonially deposited, and the cattle skulls may have been venerated. And I suggest that the proof of that is that some of these cattle skulls were found in places where these ceremonies took place outside the monuments. So some believe there was a totemic system where clans identified with certain animals or spirits. So we're talking here of shamanism. And I would suggest that is a definite. Shamanism had been with man since the Mesolithic, and we have evidence of many carvings and sculptures, such as those of the sorcerer, some that are found down in France. I can't remember particularly their name now, but there are many famous bits of cave art that suggest shamanism during the Mesolithic. And so what else do we know from these places of veneration? Well, a number of items supposedly or suspected items that are suspected of being used ritualistically, such as items like carved stone bowls, stone mace heads, and stone mace heads are very commonly found. As to their exact purpose, we don't know, but these are very common. Found a lot up in the Nessa Brodka. Pattern pottery, and all of these were likely used in ritual or symbolic contexts. And there is the structured deposits, the way things are laid out with smashed pots and animal bones under houses, and all these suggest rituals or offerings for transition or closure. And so the purpose of these rituals, then they may have been used in some cases to ensure fertility, other cases to protect the community, maybe from a blight or disease. And very definitely they were used to appease the spirits and honor the ancestors, and also, last but not least, to venerate those celestial gods, the sun and the moon, and their seasonal cycles. So in summary then, what do we know about the Britons or the Neolithic Britons and what they believed? So, the Neolithic Britain was tribal in structure, with extended kin groups living in permanent farming settlements. They were united by a shared cosmology, though regionally distinct in expression. Okay, so a shared cosmology, but with perhaps subtle changes within local communities. They were perhaps lacking an institutional priesthood, as we would consider it today, but likely it included ritual leaders or shamans that oversaw proceedings and processions and celebrations. They were spiritually centered on the cycles of nature, the spirits of the ancestors, and the sacredness of certain places. Daily life and ritual were inseparable, with houses, tools, and food all embedded in a symbolic system. They participated in large-scale seasonal gatherings such as we saw in Stonehenge, and there's evidence again at the Nessa Brodka, with Stonehenge acting as a kind of ritual focal point for midwinter ceremonies and ancestral veneration. So, that's Britain in the Neolithic. We know how they lived, and we have a fairly good degree of certainty in what they believed. So, if you all enjoyed this rather informal discussion today, then please leave a like, and any comments, drop them down below. And with that, we'll see how this one went, and we might come back and try to do this again informally. We might even go live and try this. It was a bit of an experiment to try and do it this way, and it's a matter of me trying to find something. I want to give you this information, but I want to do it in a way such as, well, makes me happy. And I find this less stressful. So, if you all enjoyed today's discussion, then, as we've already said, comments down below, thumbs up, and we'll see you again on the next one.